and welcome to our video series for Mental Health Month, where we talk to experts and people with lived experience about their strategies and tips for better mental health. Joining me today is Craig Hamilton, former ABC broadcaster, author and mental health and wellbeing speaker. Craig, thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure, Liz.
Craig, for those who don't know your story, can you take us back to the events of the year 2000 and what unfolded in your life at that point?
Okay, I think the thing I need to say first up is that I was someone who never thought they could be mentally ill. I didn't think I fitted the mould for someone who could have a mental illness and become seriously unwell. But I soon found out in 2000 that mental illness can impact on anybody, and I was in that position. So I was 37 years old at that time. Life was good career, no family issues, no money problems, the things that might trigger a depressive episode. There was no death in the family and no family breakups. So the big stuff, if you like, in life. So, you know, I could rule all those things out, and yet I started to get depressed in the first part of 2000. It was very moderate to start with. The symptoms weren't that bad. They were uncomfortable, but not enough to really debilitate you. Things like poor sleep pattern was the first thing that really came across the horizon. I'd always slept well, and through this period, January, February of 2000, I wasn't sleeping well. I was waking up at 11 o'clock at night. My mind was racing, and I was thinking about, you know, what I'd done that day, what I'd done a week before, what's happening in a week from now. And there's no peace when you've got all that going on, and therefore, you know, I was awake for a couple of hours every night that was happening.
And that takes a toll.
It takes a huge toll, and sleep is hugely underrated as a necessity for good mental health. If your mental health is poor, you will sleep. Your sleep will be affected, and if your sleep is affected, that'll then, you know, have a compounding effect on your mental health. So that was the first thing. The second thing I noticed was social withdrawal. And that's another big tick item. Now, for someone who is a social animal like me and likes to meet people, I'm a people person, I withdrew from that environment completely. I didn't feel comfortable in those situations, and so I didn't go out, and I made excuses not to. So that's another, I suppose, key point that you would write down. Then I experienced anxiety for the first time. Acute anxiety, which I'd never had before, and that manifested itself in, you know, actual burning sensations across my shoulders. Some people have sweaty palms when they get anxious. Some people get a increased heart rate, but that's how it impacted on me. Concentration was impaired, seriously impaired. Now, if we're talking about now March of 2000, so these symptoms I've had now for 3 months, concentration impaired. So even the most basic of tasks that I could normally do without thinking twice about them, I actually had to sit down and think it through. So cognitively, depression, which I'm now heading into a mild depression, is you suffer a cognitive impairment when you become depressed. Made a few big mistakes. At that time, the biggest one is I didn't tell anybody that I was unwell, and I didn't get any help mainly because I'm an Australian male and we don't do that.
So you knew something was wrong, but you didn't make any attempt to reach out?
Correct. Not to anybody. So things didn't improve. I just hoped they would, and as an optimist, I hoped they would and almost expected they would, but they didn't. Things got worse, and then, you know, I had stress every day, and I was trying to work through this, and I did work through this, and I honestly don't know how I did through this period. But then, and I was becoming increasingly withdrawn. Then I started having negative thoughts, and this was, you know, I suppose a very pessimistic view of the world. It didn't matter what the scenario was. There'd be an overall pessimism about the situation. Then I Definitely should have been getting help at that time. Then another 3 or 4 weeks down the track, we're now 6 months into the year, I experienced despairing thoughts for the first time. Despairing thoughts that I had at that time were that I'd never get better, that this was as good as it was going to get. I'd tried everything, nothing had worked. And, I was just getting better and on this slippery slope and in a pretty serious depression by this stage. Didn't know what depression was. And then probably around early August, I had suicidal thoughts for the first time in my life. Scary, very scary place to be. And particularly when you don't ever think you could be in that place. And so that is probably that's the snapshot of 8 months of my life.
And was that the trigger to reach out, to talk to family, friends, medical professionals?
No, that wasn't the trigger to go and get help at all. In fact, when I was experiencing suicidal thinking, that wasn't even enough, because at that stage you're too unwell. And this is the thing that people need to know. You're too unwell to actually ask for help when it gets that serious. My health had deteriorated to the point where my own family knew I was unwell, but not that unwell. And then one day I think a conversation was had at home, and I said, no, Louise said, thank God you're not having really serious, thoughts. You haven't ever had those thoughts. And I said, well, yeah, I have. And then a doctor was, straight to the doctor and diagnosed with depression and put on antidepressants. And that's, so many reasons to ask for help, and well before you get the situation becomes that serious.
And eventually down the track, you were also diagnosed with bipolar, and that's been something that's really, resonated with the highs and lows of how you were feeling around that time as well.
Yeah. Well, see, the thing about bipolar, and through that 8 months, I didn't have any highs. It was all lows. It was just a downhill slide. But bipolar is tricky to diagnose because the previous year my mood was elevated. And when you're elevated, you feel fantastic. You can get to the stage where you're manic and you can function at a really, sometimes very productive sort of rate, but it's not sustainable. And you can crash from there, and I did crash from there. And then the other side, when I got a diagnosis, finally I had a psychotic episode. I became manic and psychotic about 5 weeks after I started taking medication for depression for the first time. And that's when the bipolar diagnosis happened.
Now, you were a radio broadcaster at this time. I was working with you at the ABC, and you clearly had to take time off work. You were getting support from your workplace, which is great, from family, etc. You had a decision over the next few years to sort of come back and talk about what had happened to you, and you were in a pretty unique position as a radio broadcaster to be able to share your story. Was that a tough decision to actually let people know what had happened to you?
Yeah, it's a tough decision for sure, and certainly wasn't a decision that was taken lightly, because I'd got to a point where I was angry that that there were no stories, that there wasn't much intellectual property, if you like, around depression and around mental illness and around the fact that my story wasn't and isn't unique. My story and what happens every day in this country, but not everybody tells their story, and I respect that. I don't expect everybody to do what I've done, but the thing about it was, I had a choice, very clear choice that I could see, which was to either be part of the solution or part of the problem. And by not speaking up and speaking out and, actually writing a book and being interviewed and talking about my experience, then I was going to continue to be part of the problem. And that was the non-disclosure, not talking, hiding it, and I chose the other path.
And before your life as a radio broadcaster, you were in fact a coal miner in the Hunter Valley, and that was a pretty incredible workplace that you managed to tap into or tap back into as a motivational speaker. A cohort of people that are, typically not known for wanting or being able to speak about mental health and the sorts of issues that you're raising. Has that been really rewarding going into those workplaces?
Very much so, because you're right. Coal miners are a very tough breed, and I had 16 years underground as a coal miner, and I know what the culture's like. I understand the culture, and it's a tough place to work. You've got to be resilient and strong and tough to actually do what you do as part of your job, and these things would never have been discussed through the period of time when I was coal mining through the 80s and through the 90s. But having, this experience and then a 20-year speaking career, coal mining now in Australia, like so many other industries, they're on the front foot now. They're not waiting for something to happen that they can then go, oh, we need to do something. We need to act and make sure this doesn't happen again. They're very preemptive and proactive, and they get speakers in, and they get, they have presentations and education sessions and training days for their staff, their employees, across multiple shifts at operations which are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there's all sorts of different overlapping shifts, but they make sure the whole workforce gets a presentation. And the huge advantage I have when I go onto sites like that or in other blue collar sites is as soon as they know you're a coal miner, you speak their language and understand the job, that's a massive thing straight away. They go, well, look, this guy's okay. He worked in an industry that we work in, and I think that's a big plus for me, and I can tell the story without them sort of rolling their eyes and going, oh, geez, not another one of those.
And what sorts of strategies do you share with them? What sort of changes have you made in your life to try to keep that good mental health space going for you?
I knew I had to make some changes, and they were changes that I honestly believe were forced on me, and I didn't really have a choice. Something had to change or the same things were going to happen. This is an illness that's very challenging and very difficult to manage. Medication for bipolar disorder is still a must for me, and I think for most people who have a bipolar 1 illness. But the things that had to change, I had to prioritise my sleep. I had to eat better. I looked at my diet and thought I need to, have a better quality food when I'm eating. I had to make sure I was hydrating better, instead of being dehydrated. Again, underrated. I cut back alcohol almost to nothing. I had a binge drinking, I suppose, mentality, Australian male.
Like so many other Australians.
Well, and playing sport too. It was just what you did. But it wasn't helping my mental health. Alcohol's a depressant, so that went out the window. I got back into more physical exercise again after being in a sedentary job for many years. I learned how to meditate. I learned, did some yoga, all sorts of different things. Tried a lot of things, and a lot of them still are part of my strategy and strategies to remain well. And look, my health's been fantastic for 15 years.
And in terms of what you're doing now, you're really trying to get that message out about the conversation, getting people talking about these issues. Tell us what your latest project is.
Well, the latest project's been very exciting, and that's a documentary called The Promise, which we worked on, and I worked with Jai Curry, who's a Newcastle filmmaker, director. We filmed The Promise through 2023, and it was premiered in Newcastle in September of last year. Then we took it on tour for 16 dates around Australia, and in the last 2 weeks it's been on Stan Australia, streaming the film, which is fantastic. We just wanted it on a platform. It didn't matter what the platform was, so it's accessible. You've got to have Stan, but it's accessible for people to watch it and that was always the plan, to make it available.
And it's not just your story. Tell us about who you managed to get involved in it and what sorts of things people can expect to see.
Well, I was lucky to be able to call on the services, if you like, and, some favours for some pretty well-known Australians that I'd had a lot to do with in the last 20 years. Wayne Bennett straight away said he'd be involved. Tim Zhu said he would do something on fitness and the importance of fitness. Jessica Rowe, a TV personality who's had her own mental health challenges, came on board straight away. Joe Williams, who's a former NRL player, very strong mental health advocate in the Indigenous community, and Paul Harrigan, my great mate Chief, who we've got a friendship today that started through the footy career, but also 4 very powerful stories which are shared in the documentary from local people, from families, and they've lost loved ones to suicide, and they tell their stories in a very powerful way, and it just hits home how important it is to share those stories.
Well, thank you very much for sharing yours today, Craig. Thanks for being with us.
Pleasure, Liz.